Dad, you have 10 minutes to tell Mum the truth.
Whose newborn is that, and what's inside that suitcase?
Your granddaughter, and enough evidence to send you to prison.
The night my son came home, he had a newborn baby in one arm and an old black suitcase in the other. My husband looked at the child and demanded, "Whose baby is that?" My son did not answer. He placed the suitcase on our dining table, opened it, and said, "Dad, you have 10 minutes to tell Mom the truth before the police arrive." Hello, my name is Dana Bennett. I am 47 years old, and until that night, I believed the worst thing my husband had ever done was force our only son out of our home. I was wrong. What happened inside our house that evening destroyed my marriage, exposed a secret that had been growing for years, and finally taught me that keeping a family together is not the same as protecting it. 1 year earlier, our son, Ethan, had just turned 18. He was quiet, thoughtful, and far more responsible than most boys his age. He worked evenings at a neighborhood auto shop, saved almost every dollar he earned, and had been accepted into a state university with a partial scholarship. Ethan and I were close. He told me about his classes, his plans, and even the girl he loved. Her name was Lily Carter. They had known each other since middle school. Lily was bright, kind, and determined to become a nurse. My husband, Richard, never approved of her. Richard owned a small construction company outside Columbus, Ohio. He measured people by their money, their job titles, and the neighborhoods where they lived. Lily's mother cleaned offices at night, so Richard decided that Lily was not good enough for our son. He called their relationship a distraction. Ethan called it the first honest thing in his life. The tension between them grew slowly. At dinner, Richard criticized Ethan's job. In the garage, he mocked his old car. If Ethan defended Lily, Richard accused him of disrespect. I kept trying to make peace. That was my first mistake. I told Ethan that his father loved him, but did not know how to show it. I told Richard that Ethan needed patience. I believed that if I remained calm, the two people I loved most would eventually understand each other. Instead, my silence gave Richard permission to become crueler. Everything broke on a cold Friday night in November. Ethan came home late from the auto shop. Richard was waiting in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey. The moment Ethan walked through the door, Richard demanded his phone. Ethan refused. Richard stood up and said, "As long as you live under my roof, you follow my rules." Then Ethan said something I did not understand. "Is that what you tell Rebecca too?" Richard's face changed. It was only for a second, but I saw fear beneath his anger. I asked who Rebecca was. Richard ignored me. He grabbed Ethan by the jacket and pushed him against the refrigerator. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he growled. Ethan pulled away. "I know enough." Richard pointed toward the front door. "Then get out," I thought was an angry threat. I stepped between them and begged Richard to calm down. But he marched upstairs, pulled a duffel bag from Ethan's closet, and threw clothes into it. 10 minutes later, our 18-year-old son was standing on the porch with one bag and $73 in his wallet. Snow had begun to fall. I tried to follow him, but Richard blocked the door. "If you leave with him," he said, "don't come back." I wish I could tell you that I chose my son that night. I did not. I froze. Ethan looked at me through the open doorway. He did not cry or ask me to defend him. That made it worse. His eyes simply filled with disappointment. "It's okay, Mom," he said quietly. "I know what you chose." Then he walked into the snow. Those words followed me for the next year. I called Ethan the next morning, but his phone went directly to voicemail. I drove to Lily's apartment. Her mother told me Ethan was safe, but did not want to see me. I left groceries and an envelope with cash. They were returned to our porch that afternoon. For weeks, I sent messages. I apologized. I asked him to meet me. Sometimes the messages showed that they had been read, but he never replied. Richard acted as if Ethan had betrayed us. "He made his choice," he said. Whenever I mentioned Rebecca, Richard claimed she was an accountant who had once worked for his company. He said Ethan must have heard her name at the office and invented a story to hurt him. I wanted to believe that explanation because the alternative frightened me. Then strange things began happening. Our savings account lost $30,000. Richard said he had moved the money into a business investment. A letter arrived about a home equity loan I did not remember signing. He took it from my hands and told me the bank had made an error. He began receiving calls late at night. He would step outside to answer them. When I entered his home office, he closed his laptop. The man who had demanded obedience from our son suddenly needed more secrets than anyone I had ever known. 3 months after Ethan left, I received a call from Lily. Her voice was trembling. "Mrs. Bennett, Ethan needs his birth certificate and social security card for a second job. Can you help him?" I said yes immediately. Then I asked if he was all right. She paused. "He is trying to be." Before she ended the call, I heard Ethan in the background telling her not to say anything more. I found the documents and drove to the auto shop where he worked. Ethan came outside but stopped several feet from my car. He looked older. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, and grease stained his hands. Yet he stood straighter than before. I held out the envelope. "Please come home," I said. "Is he still there?" I knew he meant Richard. "Yes, then it isn't home." I started crying. Ethan's expression softened, but he did not come closer. "Mom, ask Dad about Bennett Development Services. Ask him why your name is on the paperwork." "What paperwork?" "The paperwork he thinks no one found." Before I could question him, his manager called him back inside. That evening, I searched Richard's office. I checked the desk, filing cabinets, and even the locked drawer after finding a spare key. There was nothing labeled Bennett Development Services. But I found a second phone taped beneath the bottom drawer. It contained photographs of Richard with a woman I had never seen. She was younger than me, with red hair and a small tattoo on her wrist. In one photograph, they were kissing outside a hotel. In another, Richard was giving her a diamond necklace. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. The messages were worse than the photographs. Richard had promised her that he would leave me as soon as he finished moving the assets. He told her our house would soon be his alone. He joked that I signed anything he placed in front of me. I sat on the office floor, holding that phone, while 23 years of marriage collapsed around me. Then the garage door opened. Richard was home. I returned the phone beneath the drawer and barely reached the kitchen before he entered. He kissed my cheek and asked what was for dinner. I looked at the man I had trusted for half my life and realized I knew almost nothing about him. I wanted to confront him. Instead, I remembered how quickly he had thrown Ethan into the snow. For the first time, I was afraid of my husband. The next morning, I quietly photographed every message on that phone. I also made an appointment with a lawyer named Denise Morgan. I told Richard I was going to the dentist. Denise examined the loan letter and the photographs. "Do not confront him yet," she warned me. "We need to know what he has done in your name." She ordered a credit report and searched county business records. The results made my hands shake. Bennett Development Services was a shell company created 2 years earlier. I was listed as its co-owner and guarantor, although I had never heard of it. Loans totaling more than $600,000 had been taken out using my forged signature and our home as security. Some of that money had been transferred to Rebecca. If the scheme failed, I could lose my house, my savings, and possibly face an investigation for fraud I had not committed. Denise asked whether anyone else might have records. I thought of Ethan. That night I sent him one message. "You were right. I am sorry I did not believe you." I found the second phone. "Please tell me what you know." He replied less than a minute later. "Do not let him know. I will contact you when it is safe." It was the first message my son had sent me in 5 months. After that, silence returned. I began living 2 lives. During the day, I smiled at Richard and pretended everything was normal. In secret, Denise and I collected statements, copies of contracts, and proof that I had swear else on the dates when the documents were supposedly signed. Richard became increasingly nervous. His company lost 2 major projects. Creditors called the house. Rebecca's messages became angry. She wanted more money and threatened to expose him. Then, without warning, she disappeared from his phone. All their messages were deleted. Her number stopped working. Richard told his staff she had moved to Arizona. Denise could not locate her. Neither could Ethan. That frightened me more than anything. Summer arrived. Then autumn. Nearly a year had passed since the night Ethan left. I learned through Lily's mother that Lily was pregnant. I wanted to reach out, but I was ashamed. My son had needed a mother, and I had remained inside the warm house while he walked away alone. So I bought a wool knitted blanket and kept it in my closet, hoping that one day I might be allowed to give it to my grandchild. On the anniversary of Ethan's departure, Richard came home in a strange, cheerful mood. He opened a bottle of expensive wine and said we were going to start over in Florida. "I sold the company," he announced. "We'll leave next week." My stomach tightened. He had not sold the company. Denise had checked. But more than $200,000 had vanished from its operating account that morning. Richard was running. I texted Denise beneath the table. She told me not to leave the house and said she would contact the investigator assigned to our evidence. At 7:43 that evening, the doorbell rang. Richard opened the door. Ethan stood on the porch. He was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Beside his feet was a scratched black suitcase. For 1 second, I could not move. Then I rushed toward him. Then, he let me touch his shoulder, but his eyes stayed on Richard. Richard looked at the baby and demanded, "Whose child is that?" "My daughter," Ethan answered. "Her name is Hope." I covered my mouth. My granddaughter was sleeping against his chest. She was so small that one of Ethan's hands supported nearly her entire body. I asked where Lily was. Pain crossed his face. She is at the hospital. She had complications after the delivery, but she is stable now. My knees weakened with relief. Ethan carried Hope into the dining room. He placed the suitcase on the table and opened it. Inside were company ledgers, loan contracts, bank records, a laptop, and dozens of sealed envelopes. On top of them lay a flash drive and a red notebook. Richard turned pale. "Where did you get that?" Ethan looked at me. "This is why Dad threw me out." 1 year earlier, Ethan had been repairing a company truck after hours when he saw Rebecca carrying the suitcase toward her car. She dropped the red notebook. Ethan picked it up and saw lists of payments, fake invoices, and my forged signature. He photographed several pages before returning it. Rebecca saw him. She called Richard, and Richard searched Ethan's phone that night. That was why he had demanded it the moment Ethan came home. When Ethan mentioned Rebecca, Richard panicked and forced him out before he could tell me more. But Ethan had already backed up the photographs. "Why didn't you show me?" I whispered. "I tried to tell you that night," he said. "Then you stayed with him. I didn't know if you would warn him." The truth hurt because it was fair. Richard reached for the suitcase. Ethan stepped between them. "Do not touch it." Then Ethan revealed the final secret. Rebecca had not moved to Arizona. She had discovered that Richard planned to blame the entire fraud on her. Terrified, she contacted Ethan because she knew he had seen the notebook. For months, she had collected original documents while pretending to remain loyal to Richard. 2 weeks earlier, she gave the suitcase to Ethan and entered a cooperation agreement with federal investigators. Every forged loan, every stolen payment, and every secret transfer was inside it. Richard laughed, but there was no confidence in the sound. "You think a box of stolen papers proves anything?" Ethan removed the flash drive. "No. Your recorded conversations prove it." Richard looked toward the front window. Blue lights reflected across the glass. Ethan had not come alone. 2 federal agents and a county detective walked to our door. Denise was behind them. Richard turned to me. The contempt I had seen so often was gone. In its place was desperation. "Claire, tell them this is a family misunderstanding." For 23 years, I had cleaned up his mistakes, softened his insults, and protected his reputation. I had called it loyalty. That night, I finally called it what it was: fear. I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside the red notebook. "No, Richard?" I said. "This is evidence." The agents arrested him in the same hallway where he had ordered our son out 1 year before. As they led him toward the door, Richard blamed Rebecca, Ethan, his employees, and finally me. He blamed everyone except himself. I did not answer. Hope woke and began to cry. Ethan lifted her gently against his shoulder, and the sound of my granddaughter's voice replaced the sound of my husband's accusations. That was the moment my old life ended. The months that followed were difficult, but justice came carefully and completely. Richard pleaded guilty to bank fraud, wire fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. Rebecca testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. The court confirmed that my signatures had been forged, and the fraudulent claims against our home were removed. Richard's remaining assets were used to repay employees, lenders, and clients he had cheated. I filed for divorce. I kept the house, not because I wanted the memories, but because I refused to let his crimes take one more thing from us. The best revenge was not watching Richard lose his company or hearing the judge sentence him to prison. It was rebuilding the family he had tried to control. Lily recovered. She and Hope moved into the house with Ethan while they saved for an apartment. I gave Lily the knitted blanket I had hidden in my closet. Then I apologized to both of them without making excuses. Ethan did not forgive me immediately. He should not have. Trust does not return because someone says sorry. It returns through hundreds of small choices made correctly after one enormous choice was made wrong. So I showed up. I watched Hope while Lily attended nursing classes. I helped Ethan apply to college again. I listened when he was angry. I did not defend Richard or ask Ethan to forget. Slowly, my son began telling me about his life again. One evening, almost 2 years after he had been forced out, Ethan found me repainting his old bedroom. He leaned against the doorway and said, "You know, Hope is going to need a room when she stays with Grandma." I looked at him, unable to speak. He smiled. It was not complete forgiveness, but it was an open door. Today, Hope is learning to walk. She falls often, then pushes herself back up with both hands. Every time she does, Ethan cheers. She has won a championship. I understand why. Our family fell, too. But the people who truly loved one another stood back up. I once believed a good wife kept the peace, and a good mother kept everyone under the same roof. Now I know better. Peace built on silence is only a hiding place for cruelty. And a house is not a home simply because a family lives inside it. A home is the place where the truth is safe. Richard threw our son out to protect his lies. 1 year later, Ethan returned carrying a new life in one arm and the truth in the other. The baby made me a grandmother. The suitcase set me free. And when I finally chose my son, I did not lose my family. I found it.